Sisters and brothers, sisters and brothers, this is African Genius, the podcast promoting Pan-African thought, culture, and art, cultivating a universal African mind. I am your co-host, Uncle ASAR ALKEBULAN.
Yeah, man, and I'm your co-host, Wesley Pepper from South Africa. Greetings, everybody. Like Asar said, we are to promote African thought and African leaders and African people and just beautiful African ideology. And we've got a really cool guest today, Tommy Duncan. How are you doing, my king?
Outstanding. Everything is great, and it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, man, it's always good to meet guys. So yeah, man, I mean, since you and Asar shares quite a history together, I think you guys can start off. I think just for the technical thing, I'll just be switching off my video from time to time because I see it's skipping and jumping and doing funny tricks here. So yeah, just bear with me. Yeah,
we're all good.
So I was talking to Wesley before we came on, and he was like, "Well, you know Tommy, right?" I said, "Yeah, I was just counting the years, and it's like 37 years, brother. It goes back to, not to give away your age because we're the same age, but it was 1986, about this time of year."
Yes, sir. It's been a minute, but hey, bro, you and I are both hanging in there, still looking good. So
that's right. That's right. So tell the people where you're based.
So I'm based in Dallas, Texas, in the United States. Dallas is in the North Texas region of the state of Texas. And I am actually born and raised in Dallas in the area called Oak Cliff, which is probably one of the largest segments of the Dallas area, man. But that is where I'm from. I travel quite a bit. Even though I'm from Dallas, born in Dallas, not of Dallas, and travel quite a bit. So it's been a good ride, man.
Well, so tell us about the Oak Cliff area. I mean, I've visited Dallas, quite often in the past. And is that I guess, predominantly Black part of the city, or how's the city laid out?
At least for now. But as you've seen, like in probably Harlem, in East Austin, that you're probably more familiar with, in some other areas, some of that is changing. But yeah, Dallas historically, let me put it in context. Most of Oak Cliff is south of downtown Dallas. The area when folks are relocating with their jobs from other parts of the country, not one of the areas that the corporate HR and executives would tell them to move to, not because it's a bad area of town, but it's not where they want them to move. So if you look at some of the probably faster growing areas, you may have heard of Frisco, Plano, Richardson, some of those other areas in the northern, what I'll call more mainstream areas of the Dallas-Fort Worth area in the burbs. That's where they steer them to. Oak Cliff, where I grew up, is, man, just a laid-back, middle-class, lower middle-class neighborhood. When I was growing up, my family, my mom and my dad, when they were married, they were one of the first few Black families that moved into what was then a predominantly all-white neighborhood. And of course, I saw you probably know what happens when a couple of Black families move in. Within a year or so, it's all that was happening then, and it's still happening today. But Oak Cliff is a great place. Still a lot of very strong communities and families in that area. But as we've seen throughout this country, of course, gentrification, or so-called gentrification, is real, and we'll see what happens. But it's where I'm from, man. It's where a lot of my family are, and I always hail from Oak Cliff, Dallas, USA.
Okay. And you speak of gentrification. That's something that actually was going on in D.C. when I got there in the late 80s, and it had, taken over the city by the time I left in the 2013. And again, like you said, South Dallas, the same thing was happening in Southeast Washington, D.C. And they were moving in and moving the brothers and sisters out. You and I went to the same university, yep. Texas A&M University, which is predominantly, let's say, overwhelmingly.
Well, let's be very clear. Texas A&M in College Station, that is the flagship campus, for those who may not know very much about it, is now 2% Latino.
Okay. Okay. So,
Yeah, I think there's just a bit of a delay in the broadcast there. Yeah, so just bear with us. ASAR, you still there? Yeah, just to the listeners, just bear with us, man. Oh, shit. I don't know what the hell. Just give me a second. My screen is still a bit. There we go. There we go. The lady said we're recording, so I see the screen is still frozen. There we go. Is everybody still there?
All right. You're
All
back.
right.
We're good.
Yeah, man. Sorry about that. I don't know. Network issues, man.
we're good.
We are good. So where were we at?
I
We
think you
talked
guys
about
are
the
Go ahead.
demarcation of University of Texas and Texas A&M with the 25% thing, and they get that. Yeah.
So no, that means federal money, government money from the federal government for institutions that have a certain bar in terms of Latin American population. And I believe Texas A&M is currently right at about 20. Matter of fact, this was a couple of years ago. The then interim president was showing a report of the demographics of the university. And I thought it was pretty interesting because I remember when both you and I were at school, I want to say, of course, the Black population at that time was maybe 2%.
Right, including student athletes.
Exactly.
2 or 3% out of 40,000.
The Latin American population at that time was maybe somewhere between 8 to 10%. It's 30-something odd years later. Of course, the Black population is still at maybe 2%, maybe.
Wow.
But the Latin American population is at 25%. Interesting thing, we're in the state of Texas. Asian population at Texas A&M is now at 8% plus.
Wow.
It was barely on the radar when we were at school.
Right. And you mentioned it was 30-something years ago. Go ahead and put it out there, man. It's 37. It's almost 40 years ago, brother.
I wasn't trying to age you, you know.
But I would say the reason I brought up Texas A&M and our attending there, I'm not sure where you were, and that's what the question is. And I've shared on Wesley's other platform, our Lexcia, that oddly enough, at a predominantly white university, it's a very conservative place, very conservative, Republican white, was where I began to mature politically and culturally. It was that environment, I guess something happened that forced me to into cultural awareness, or we may term Black consciousness, that type of thing. Talk to us a little about, where you were politically when you were at Texas A&M, and what type of organizations were you involved in?
No, I appreciate you asking the question. I mean, I was fortunate in a sense growing up because my father was a career teacher. So he taught history, I think, at that time, and he taught politics and economics later in his career. So I remember growing up, and he would pull me and some of our friends, into the house. And he had these old, I don't know if you remember those old reel films, those big circular old films. Yeah. And so he would have some of those films, and he would show them to us at home of things that were going on in history at the time. So when I went to Texas A&M, I wasn't as consciously aware of the politics going on in our system, but I was fortunate because with my father being a history teacher, I was at least exposed to it. And of course, as you know, we got very little or nothing in our history books in school, in high school, et cetera, and really not very much in college, except I took a African American history course while I was at Texas A&M University. Now, what happens is, I had some friends, some who went to New York U, some other places. And so when you look at the combination of what was going on at our school, at Texas A&M, and knowing it wasn't always overt. You can see it in your face, even though you had kickers there, and what we
kickers
call
are cowboys. Yeah, we got to tell people.
Yeah.
Kicker is like a very, very old, Confederate mindset. Confederate flag, Civil War era thinking, white person. Cowboy. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So I had other friends who went to other schools. Most of them went to school in Texas, but some of them went, in the Northeast. And so we would have these conversations about, what was going on in school at the time. My friends in the South, pretty much very similar MO into what they want to keep you in the South, which is ignorant. But when you go to the Northeast and other places, as you are aware, there's a level of consciousness, there's a level of political sophistication that's a little bit different when you go to the Midwest and the Northeast compared to the South. So having conversations with other people and what's going on in DC, New York, Philly, and some of those other places was just the beginning of that evolution. But going into school, it was funny because I actually wore, not at your level, brother, but I actually wore some African attire. And I would wear that to class, and people kind of looked at me as like, dude, what are you doing? And there are some people who still to this day, and I forget about that, would say, man, you remember you used to wear them dashikis, running across the campus and stuff like that. There are two things in particular that point out to me while I was still in college that really forced or shaped my thinking. One was a good friend of mine, actually ex-girlfriend from high school, who introduced me to the autobiography of Malcolm X while I was in college. Reading that book, I don't know if blew my mind was an understatement in terms of the way it opened up my thinking and put me in a frame of mind. Well, first of all, I was pissed when I started reading it. Anyone who reads that book, first of all, you get pissed. Then you start thinking, and then your whole awareness of things begin to change because things that you always saw begin to look different. If you, for instance, read Francis Cress Welsing's The Isis papers, things you've always seen begin to start looking different because your awareness of reality and the symbolism and the things that you see actually begin to mean something that you never saw. You grew up your whole life and see the same image, but all of a sudden, your mind opening up and being aware of what's really going on begins to change your whole consciousness. So the autobiography of Malcolm X began to change my awareness. I remember being in an economics class. There was a guy, I forget the guy's name, a white professor who taught economics. And economists, they have a tendency to be very brash, or what some people would call arrogant. He was talking about the institution of slavery and how it saved the Africans from a backwards continent where they had accomplished very little, and that they should have been because they had
ASAR? Hello? Ah. Hey, man. Yeah, man, guys, man, this network thing is, I don't know what's going on here, but we are back here. I have a back anyway, but we were stopping, Tommy, when you were talking about your professor saying about
exactly. So I had an economics professor who, in essence, was putting out a message to the class of how backwards Africa was and how the Africans were being saved from this backwards environment and they were being civilized, per se. Fortunately, I was I mean, I knew better than that. And I literally, I didn't know whether I was getting ready to get into a physical fight with him. I just know that my mind responded and my body literally lifted me up. And then we had a conversation out, and I think somebody told me, because I didn't remember it until later, 25 years later. And I said, not today. And I started charging towards all that being said is that we live in these environments where you don't oftentimes see the environment when you're inside of the fishbowl. And so things like that, I think today some people call them microaggressions and things of that nature.
Yeah, man.
But that's, I think, where partly the environment forced me into it, and part, fortunately for me, my home environment began to shape my thinking in some of those areas.
Yeah, I experienced a lot of those things. No, I'm going to ask you a question, Wesley. But I experienced a lot of those things at school myself, which, moved me toward consciousness. But Wesley, I wanted to ask you something Tommy said about history and our people. We have erroneous beliefs of our people on the continent. And I wanted to ask you, Wesley, what is taught about what we call the Middle Passage, the transatlantic slave trade, in quotes, if you will? What is taught on the African continent, particularly in South Africa?
Yeah, man, I was sort of going to want to follow up on that, because interesting you say that the overall narrative from an academic sort of, I was an academic class, because these days is a class, is that it was backward and has been taught. We were taught a very similar, our history book started off, and I'm talking when I was probably 10, 11, there, about when I could still remember. But it is like I really remember what we were taught. We were taught that civilization, in a sense, came when the Dutch landed here in 1652. And when they landed, they colonized what is now the Western Cape, Cape Town. And then, they bred into the inland. And then after that, we had what we call the Groot Trek, when the Afrikaner literally colonized and genocided his way pretty much from Cape Town to what is now Gauteng, Johannesburg, which is about 1,000 and I don't know, somewhat, but they pretty much just colonized the whole thing. We were taught that, in South Africa, we speak Afrikaans, which is a dialect which the Afrikaner boy, but also the colored people speak as well. We were taught that was their language. It was their culture. So in other words, what they did, what from 1652, after the Dutch came, then the French, and then eventually the English came. What we were taught was we called it, I think, called refreshment stations. There was a very polite, a very sanitized a word for, because the ships were sailing all the way from Europe around the Cape to go to what is now India, the East. And they would stop in Cape Town, and they would call it a refreshment station. So they would come here and do all the things. But what happened was that as soon as Van Riebeeck landed, they started to colonize bit by bit every single year. So we were taught that civilization came in 1652. Pre that, you have to pretty much do your own digging. You have to go and do your own looking. And then with the apartheid government, which is the point I wanted to make earlier on, the whole narrative around slavery. So if you learn of other Black people being, for example, in the US, in Europe, and so forth, the slave narrative, what was there? Those people are there because of. So I'm talking about the late 80s, when I was about 11, 12, there, younger than that. That narrative has only changed somewhat in '94, where it's got a black face now. But that's, I'll have to put that into context. So Tommy, I actually want to ask, and ASAR, we can actually have this conversation. You said something that also resonated with me there, when you said that how consciousness is sort of backwards more in the south of where you are based. From me, I follow a lot what's happening over there, and I know that the alt-right has gotten its fingers really, I guess, a lot in the south of Texas, where you're based. How important, because I can speak for myself as well, how important do you think, let me just call it knowledge, or let me say self-awareness, and just looking at yourself. I just guess being a smart person. I'm trying to think of all these other flowery terms, because we are living in a really interesting way, because the way this type of train of thought that happened in the 80s, some of those laws are being revisited today, and sort of being and a lot of that has got to do with education. I know that for sure. And it's funny, you're talking about all of the stuff that's happening in the States. Similar stuff is happening here in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Botswana. Very, very, very similar things. Yeah. So I mean, I can go on and on, but I guess what man. So what's your, how important, and yeah, how important do you think that is in 2023? And yeah.
So make sure I'm understanding, how important do I think what is now?
How important do you think, you were saying that there's a real lack of sorry man, let me just rephrase my question, because I'm also realizing I'm speaking sort of out of context. Everybody's living in an echo chamber right now, and the alt-right is a very good example like that. It's very difficult to educate somebody who doesn't want to be educated. And then there's that middle ground, I guess, for people who are just, I don't know, I don't care. Do you think we have a duty? Do you think it's important for us not just to educate ourselves further, but educate other people about what's really going on?
So there are two things that I'd like to, as I think about your question, which is very valid. So when you look at, so you talked about the context of how history is taught.
And how it keeps reinventing itself and just coming back.
But the question is, whose history is it? Who is it written by? Whose point of view is it coming from? Because you're talking about a group of people that came to South Africa when there were thousands of years of history that already existed. And if you look at the narrative throughout practically there was only one country in Africa that was not colonized, Ethiopia, correct?
Yeah, Ethiopia, yeah.
But practically every other country, and we're talking about 54 countries, were colonized by Great Britain, France, the Dutch, Spain, the Portuguese, etc. And so when you look at how history is taught, there is an old saying that's like, he who pays the pianist, calls the tune. And so when you consider that the history is written from another person's point of view, not the native culture, then you have colonization not just through warfare, military weapons, but you also have colonization through ignorance, through the education system, or the lack thereof in certain perspectives. And so if you have a group of people that are educating another group of people based upon their point of view, there are always two sides to a coin. And so as a result, unless you're talking about the history of your people, your culture, your ancestors, I'm not saying that their history isn't relevant, but unless you're talking about the history of your culture, your people, your grandparents, you have an obligation to research and understand your own history, because quite frankly, their history is not going to do you any good.
And what do you think? I think Wesley was also asking, what do you think in terms of when you talk about in the South, there isn't that cultural awareness as much as it is on the East Coast? How
because from let me just give you another perspective on that, because from an outsider we look at like Texas as being very right-wing, very ignorant, very fat, very Trump, that type of thing, and violent and guns and just nasty. So yeah.
Texas is definitely a what we call a pro-Second Amendment state, right to bear arms. Obviously, Texas has the dubious honor of course, being one of those states that decided to secede from the Union. Some say is to protect their freedom, but quite frankly, it was to protect their slavery, because that was what the economy was built on. So it has, everything to do with protecting the institution of slavery, because that is what built their wealth. That is what built their base of power. And so it's about the law of self-preservation for them. And so when we look at that, part of that is being able to contain potential, contain the potential of those Africans who were enslaved from rebelling and or creating their own freedom. And they did that through, education systems. They kept them, of course, from being able to read, from being able to get an education. And still, and to this day, to a certain degree, they limit the scope of education within our country. They're talking about, let's say, Greg Abbott, who is the governor of the state of Texas. He's politicking on eliminating what they call this so-called woke agenda, which puts everybody, or let's just say it puts the white community into a state of fear. Why? Because they don't want to feel that anything is going to be introduced into their history that's going to make their children feel bad. Well, what about the children of our community who have been psychologically castrated since they've been in the education system? There was a point in time where we had what we call segregated schools. Of course, Black children couldn't go to the white schools. And so they went to segregated Black schools. And even though they had limited resources, they had teachers who cared. They had books that talked about their history, and it educated them to prepare them for the real world. Well, since desegregation, a lot of our communities and economies were unraveled. Unfortunately, we took the wrong narrative in some cases, where our economies, where you had the poorest of the poor and the wealthiest of the wealthy, at least in our community, that would be the doctors, the attorneys, and the folks who were doing well, they were living in the same community, as someone who was just what they would consider to be poor or lower middle class. But we had a community, we were together, and to a certain degree, within the confines of segregation, we still controlled our destiny because we controlled the education of our children. A lot of that has been lost since desegregation, because a significant number of our children are now in white schools. What is wrong with that? Point. Nothing wrong with that in principle, except how much of the accomplishments of your ancestors are taught in those history books.
Yep.
When we talk about, some of the greatest scientists in human history, many of which who happen to look like you and me, where are those folks in our history books? And so what does that do to the mindset of young children when they don't see anything about their ancestors, their forefathers, their foremothers, except for the fact that they were enslaved during the practically entire human history in a specific country, with the exception of maybe the last. Well, if we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, we're talking about close to 150 years. But even if we're talking about the fundamental right to vote being guaranteed to everybody in the country, you're really only talking about 50-ish years. You're only talking about 50-ish years that you have the guaranteed right to vote. And of course, they're attacking that daily, weekly, monthly, all across our country.
And so we talk about education in the state of Texas. Whatever textbooks are used in the state of Texas, or the policy behind education in the state of Texas, Tommy just outlined beautifully the conservatism, if you will, of the state of Texas. The rest of the country follows suit. So if Texas is conservative and
Florida as well.
And if they're, let me just use the word conservative in their view of history and inclusion, then the rest of the country is going to follow.
Yeah, it's very similar in South Africa. We have like us, the Western Cape and Gauteng, they set the pace. And the point that you are just saying, I mean, you guys are about 50 years since you could vote. 1994 was less than 30 years, or just over 30 years ago. It's less than a generation away. And during that time, the point that Tommy says about all the black kids going to white school, we have the same fucking problem here. Yeah. Oh yes, sorry. Yeah, Tommy. I have got my eye on that, my brother. I was actually just gonna wrap everything up now and then just send you a fresh link. There's like just 4 minutes and 22 seconds left of this session. You were gonna say something?
Yeah, because we want to talk about. No, I was just gonna say, yeah, we can do a fresh link because I want to talk about Black Men Speak.
Yeah. And I'd just like to add on to, like, I think this these white schools actually doing us a disservice, especially not just with history but with economics, with maths. These kids are coming out of these schools in South Africa. This is my last point quickly. In South Africa, you can actually have, and it's normal now, we have an all black couple, as in like darkly melanated people, like real African people, and everybody speaking English. Like 100% of everybody. So the kids are speaking to the parents and back and forth. And that is the most accepted. It's just normal now. So there's a huge backlash in SA of our languages being lost through in these in this new school system. But we can unwrap that a little bit. I'll send you guys the link in about a minute's time. All right.
All right.
And, it's interesting that you bring up that point, Brother Wesley, because, one of the things that I've always admired about brothers and sisters, that I meet from the motherland is that on average, they're able to speak 4 to 5 languages.
Yeah.
The official colonized language. There are at least 2 to 3 dialects that they speak, but that identifies with their culture, that history. And
that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Let's actually take that point and run with it afterwards. I'll send you the guys' link and the link in a minute's time. Everything is set up here. All right, gents, speak now. And we're back. Yeah, my picture. Just take it off. We were just talking about the education, or the re-education, or educating, or the contemporary education, whichever word. Just to give you guys context again from South Africa, I've got a huge issue with that. I think that our current school syllabus stresses kids. These kids are stressed, and nothing in this curriculum speaks to our values, our traditions, nothing. And they say that the business language is English. Okay, sure, fine, I get that. Even now we're communicating, I get that. But I also find that our history is being lost through this education, re-educating. And I also think that our cultures are lost. And just to give you another spin, the Afrikaner community, these are the guys, the old Broederbond, the old guys from apartheid that started that thing. I think about just less than 100 years ago, or just over 100 years ago. These guys have built like 2 fucking universities, bro. There's University of Stellenbosch, which is predominantly still an Afrikaner state, right? Their ideology is, every time if you read about something South Africa to do with racism, it's usually from there. And they're busy building another one. And this one, apparently, there's a lot of to and from saying they are still building and some say they're not, but it doesn't, like these guys, I think the site was approved somewhere in the Pretoria area, but don't quote me on that. But these guys are building another institution from money which they've sourced amongst themselves. And just to give you context, in Africa we have 54 states. The Afrikaner NGO, AfriForum, is the richest NGO on the continent. People that are less than, There are less than 20% of our population in South Africa have more money than 54. Like, it is ridiculous. That is why they have the power to do this. So that's also why I'm very passionate about these type of platforms, because here we can sort of control the narrative. We can connect with brothers like yourself and ASAR and talk about these issues and potentially look for a solution. But that is a real issue we have. And now with COVID, the fact that everything, you have this online learning. So the majority of the households can probably just afford one laptop, but now you have to have multiple devices and data, which is an added expense. So you're already getting a crappy education, but now you're getting a super crappy education. because now you don't even have access because access has been limited. So that is a problem I've seen across the continent and across the diaspora as well. So yeah, man, you brothers can give me your take on that.
In addition to what you're talking about, the data and the devices and that kind of thing, then we have the power cuts like you're experiencing in South Africa. Like,
oh my man, like that is such another crazy issue we have here. I mean, you can even see that the network, that even now the network is jumpy because there's some other power things that are knocked out, and I mean, I've got no power.
and then in West Africa, it's routine, especially in Nigeria, that the power is out for extended periods of time. I'm not talking about a couple of hours. I'm talking about days and weeks. The power is out,
and they're using that to give us terrible service and education. And I think this is a huge problem we're facing, because like you were commenting earlier on about the South, and at least in Texas we have these I'm talking about this Trumpism. I see that's a popular word these days. In South Africa we have a very similar. Nationalism is on the rise here in a major way, and these guys are taking inspiration from or drawing in inspiration from that's crazy, which is happening in the States and in France and in Italy and in the UK, because there's nothing else but South Africa love the fucking UK. So we can have an episode where we can hate just on the UK, and I'm okay with that. Okay, I'm okay with that. But like I just find we're living in a very interesting time. So it'll be cool to hear, your guys' perspectives on that.
Yeah, well, I was going to transition, Wesley, with Tommy, with what he's doing to actually address some of these issues, and that is he co-hosts a podcast called Black Men Speak, and
yes,
I'm a faithful
I
listener
listen to
every
that.
Wednesday night. And so, Tommy, talk to us what you're doing. Talk to us about what you're doing with Black Men Speak and how that, is your contribution in terms of Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism, whatever, in helping to educate our people about issues that we were just talking about from here in America as well as around the world and on the African continent.
Right. So Black Men Speak, it's a podcast or a channel that I'm a part of that I do with a partner of mine every Wednesday at 8:00 p.m. American Central Time. And what we do is we kind of share stories and thoughts on things that are happening in our communities. And the reason that it was relevant to me, I was actually invited to the show by my co-host, Jimmy Stewart, who I've known for probably a good 20 to 25 years. We're both from Dallas. He grew up in an area called South Dallas. Now that's straight the hood. I grew up in Oak Cliff, which is got some hoodish places in it. But all that being said is that we came to the show, and we are evolving, as a show in terms of the content that we present. But we focus on news that impacts in some way our community, whether it be in Texas, whether it's in the United States, whether it's global. We've been spending a fair amount of time talking about, for instance, what's going on in Haiti, which nobody else seems to want to talk about what's going on in Haiti, which is kind of closer to where we are. We see in the news, for instance, every day what's going on in the Ukraine and the support that the U.S. government and the UN has for the Ukraine. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. We understand that there are politics behind that. But from my point of view, when you look at Haiti, which is, the first country that fought for and won its own freedom on its own terms,
sure,
from the Western powers. And unfortunately, since they won that freedom from France, from the West as a political infrastructure, they have not ever not been attacked economically, politically, militarily. The U.S. occupied Haiti for a period of time in the early 20th century to continue to be attacked. But we're in a country that supposedly believes in democracy, the freedom of the people to decide who is going to rule them and who is going to control their destiny. So we talk about that. We talk about things that are going on in the U.S., in the Caribbean, in Africa. We talked a little bit last week about of course, the new president in Nigeria, because at the end of the day, I'm an advocate of what Malcolm X said, is that, you know what, the same thing going on in Chicago is going on in the Congo.
That's right.
We're fighting and dealing with the same battle because, in essence, even though it may look a little bit different, we've got a common enemy regardless of where we are in the world. And so whether we're talking about Pretoria or whether we're talking about Pittsburgh, we're fighting the same fight. We're dealing with the same structural issues because white supremacy is a global construct.
That's right.
And so we have to understand how similar our situations are, regardless of where we are on the globe, and understand that we're all fighting the same fight. And so that's why we're doing what we need to do. One, we have to be informative. We're not in the entertainment business, but some of the things that we share may be a little bit more, they may be a part of the industry. But what we focus on is being progressive in terms of talking to the issues that a lot of folks aren't doing in some of their platforms. And I think there are a lot of great platforms out there, including this one, obviously, from what I can see. We're just trying to converge a lot of what we're seeing, not just where we live, but globally, so that we can help people understand we're dealing with the same issues. We've got to understand that we've got the same problems. And if we can understand that we have more similarities than we do differences, regardless of where we live, then that helps us to understand that it is much easier for us to converge and unify on the issues that we are having and the places that we are trying to go, so that we can fight together, regardless of where we are in Africa, in Europe, in the Caribbean, in Canada, in the United States, in Brazil, in Mexico, wherever we are, based upon certain principles. And that is number one, the law of self-preservation. Number two, controlling our destiny, because if you're not controlling your destiny, what are you doing?
Who do you try to live?
And number three, getting to a point where you can prosper, take care of your families, make sure that you have a future, because let's be very clear, whether it comes to military, whether it comes to economics, whether it comes to healthcare, there's a bull on our back. I'm sorry, there is not a bull on our back, but there is a target on our back. It doesn't matter where we are, where we live, how much money you think we got. I mean, if you think you can out money yourself from being considered what they might call the N-word, ask Michael Jackson, God rest his soul. Ask Tiger Woods. Ask Bill Cosby. I don't care how much money you got. It's more than about money. Because all those folks had reached a point or a pinnacle of success where they thought that they could outflank racism and or white supremacy. And they found out that they can't outflank it by themselves. And so we've got to understand that we've got to see our commonality and the struggles that we're dealing with in such a way that we're not hating anybody. We're trying to love each other so that we can survive, so that we can prosper, so that we can build our communities, so that we can control our own destiny. And so we just talk about things that are relevant to us.
Yeah, it's not about hate. And that's also an unfortunate narrative that keeps being peddled. Like these days, if you disagree with somebody, that means I completely hate, and it's not the case. It's not the case. There's very little, especially on social media these days, there's very little room for debate and just honest, robust debate. So I agree with you there.
It's gotten so bad, and Brother ASAR can even talk to this, that within the United States, our communities have, in certain cases, become so divided. I mean, they got the brothers and sisters, fighting against each other. You got young folks and old folks, pointing fingers at each other. And I was like, that's where the beauty of, reading a book like Francis Cress Welsing's Isis paper, says, quite frankly, you look at the symbolism, everything that is happening, you have no idea that they have you fighting a war against yourself while they're fighting a war against you. So what chance do you have if someone has you thinking that you have to attack yourself while they're attacking you? Well, you're doing the work for them.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. I think it's very
agree.
important. Thomas mentioned at least two books, and we talked about education. It is important for us as a people, communities around the world to read, and learn of our history. There are plenty of books out there that have been published. I mean, W.B. Du Bois back in the 20s.
Souls of Black folks?
Writing different books, information on who we are. And the information is out there. So what we need to do is take the time to absorb it. I've talked on, again, the other platform, Wesley co-host, about a quiet time. Tommy spoke about our communities warring generationally or geographically or what have you. And then there's so much noise that we can't think, we can't reflect, and we can't plan. So we have to, if not come together before that, we have to stop and listen and begin to reflect and think. And then we won't get caught up in all of these machinations of white supremacy.
Brother, you said something that's so powerful there. There's so much noise going on, whether you're talking about noise pollution in your environment, whether you're talking about the television, the radio, even what's on our phones, on the internet. There's so much noise going on. Well, God didn't make any flaws when he designed human beings. Being able to listen to the God inside of you reveals so many things. But to Brother ASAR's point, you have to sit down and listen to yourself first. Just the magic of taking 30 minutes a day in silence. Some folks, and I'm not trying to advocate any particular religion, for those who pray, talking to God, and to those who meditate, listening to God, just taking 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour a day to sit in silence and listen, you would be amazed as to where your mind goes and what can be revealed to you over a period of time, just listening to your body, listening to your mind, allowing the ancestors, allowing whomever, regardless of what your spiritual system is, allowing the spirit world to talk to yourself. But we have so much noise. We have so much stuff going on that by the time we get through with everything, we go to bed, we wake up all over again, and then you're talking 10 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. We have the same issues on the continent, in South Africa as well. And the noise, it's even difficult to escape the noise. And I'm talking like even physical or actual noise. But there's always somebody at night playing some loud music somewhere. And there's always somebody. I agree with you there. I wanted to add another point. When you say to sit down and take a half an hour, I'm clearly younger than you, my two esteemed guests over here by a couple of years.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
And our generation, I guess to take time out in 2023 is not as easy as it was like currently when we have these rolling blackouts. Sometimes I've found that being too quiet actually gets kind of creepy. There's a sense of, I don't know, I can't put my finger on it, man. I should actually do an episode on that. There's just an eeriness, and there's also I guess what I'm saying is just sometimes in 2023 taking out half an hour just to sit and think might not be as easy as that. Necessary though, but not that. And also just the point on when you were saying reading, I just want to add on to that. Like what I love about technology is, like we were talking about Dr. Franz Kresling's book, like I'm sitting now, I had to go to a library to have a look at it. Now you can just go pick up your phone and you can most probably find a PDF there. So the information is out there. I think it's just people like our responsibility to keep peddling that information, and try to take ownership of this digital space, which is what we're currently trying to do, and just create our own little echo chamber.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting that God designed us with everything that we need.
Sure.
And the world teaches us that there is something outside there that we need. But if you will sit back and listen to your body, allow your mind to open up, every answer you need is within you. We have become so indoctrinated into being dependent on Western medicine.
Yes, I am back. I'm back. Yep. Same problem like earlier on. But yeah,
but God, but bottom line is God designed us. God designed the body perfectly. We just can't outsmart it. And sometimes we are taught to try to outsmart what God has designed, so to speak.
So Tommy's talking about putting healthy things in your body, and I'm sitting there with a glass of scotch, right? But we ain't gonna talk about that. But always one nearby.
Well, the question is breaking down what scotch came from, and everything that scotch came from wasn't bad. It's just been distilled in order to produce an effect.
That's right. So I got some we got fiber going on right here with my scotch.
There you go.
But, so I'm watching the news broadcast the other day, Tommy. He's a fraternity brother of yours, owns his own news channel. I mean, broadcast system.
Right.
I'm not gonna call it his platform of ours, you know. But he had some physicians on there, some nutritionists and physicians on there. I think it was Friday, and they were talking about childhood obesity or obesity in people. Then they started talking about the move to give children medication to counter their obesity. And to my surprise, to my astonishment, every single person that addressed their question, all of these professional nutritionists, doctors, or whatever, they were in favor of it. Because their position was it was coming from their position was it was coming from a holistic point of view. And if it took, you know, because obesity has to do with more than just eating, I guess, a lot, right? There's a mental aspect, there's a spiritual aspect, there's a self-concept aspect, all of that. So I'm thinking, this is crazy. You're gonna condone giving medicine to children who are basically fat. Children are supposed to be fat.
Well,
let me finish. So my point was, before we start giving them medicine, why don't we stop putting high fructose corn syrup in the food? How about we stop pumping chickens and cattle full of steroids? How about we get our children off of these technological devices and outside and play? How about that before we just jump to, oh, it's okay to give our children medication for obesity?
Because the problem with that is that you're talking about children who are in their preteens that are now becoming a part of the system by being medicated at an age that, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a food scientist, so I mean, I won't go that deep into it. But if I look back, you know, 30, 40 some odd years ago when we were coming up, obesity was extremely rare. Very rare. I mean, if you look at old high school yearbooks when we were coming up, Brother ASAR, I mean, yeah, there were some folks who were chunky, but I mean, they were in the minority. But within our community, the large majority of not just adults, but children, obesity, or they are suffering with obesity. And so now what the pharmaceutical industry is doing and what healthcare is doing in this country is they are monetizing the suffering and the dishealth of our children. It's all about economics. There is no reason that you should be putting 8, 10, 15-year-olds on chronic medication to deal with a problem that you're not even willing to go to the root cause. Now, my question is, are we talking about genetically engineered food being the root problem? Well, we're probably not talking about that. Are we talking about these calorie and sugar-rich drinks that they're consuming several times a day? Are we talking about going to McDonald's and Burger King and Pizza Hut 2 to 3 times a day? Are we talking about the fact that how many of these parents are even cooking meals for their children? How many times a day, much less how many times a week, are they cooking a meal for their children, but they're dealing with obesity? That's just cause and effect. Because I remember even a few years when I was a couple of years out of college that I was teaching substitute, I was substitute teaching in school. And I noticed the children were bringing sodas and chips to class. And I'm like, didn't you eat breakfast this morning? And I was like, well, no, this is my breakfast. And they would have like powdered donuts and some type of Kool-Aid. And then they might have one.
It's the same in South Africa.
For lunch, but guess what they eat for lunch? They're eating pizza for lunch. And what are they eating when they go home? They're eating fast food. Well, when you look at the core ingredients, I won't even call it nutrition in fast food.
High fructose corn syrup, sugar, salt, and oil.
And so by the time that these kids are in their late teens and early 20s, this stuff re-engineers your whole body. Because if you're raised up on a staple of sugar, salt, flour, high fructose corn syrup, and all of these other
chemicals.
That's exactly what they are. Manufactured, that's the key. Manufactured foods, you're going to have a health problem. You're going to have a health pandemic, which is what we're dealing with now.
What does it look like in South Africa, Wesley?
As I said, I'm listening here, and we could have been living like right next to each other. Like literally, it's the same thing. Like the brother Tommy was saying, like when these kids are getting, when they leave school, sometimes the kids have to travel excessive distances. The argument could be made there wasn't time for a breakfast. I blame, well, we won't point fingers, but they'll get to school. What we have in South Africa, there's these chips. It's like, I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but like it's very, very popular and cheap. So what will happen in South Africa is that I'm talking about like government schools where the nutrition value of the food that they sell there is even lower. So you'll have these walkers that set up a shop outside the school premises, so they don't have to pay the school anything, and they will be selling. I mean, like the quality of these things these kids are consuming is terrible. And what makes it, and just to give another spin, is also helping these kids litter, because they keep eating these little packets and just dropping it everywhere. No one is even telling them how to pick up, which I find another disturbing problem. And it's the same thing. What I've noticed, like in Johannesburg, is a very good example. You can't drive 2 kilometers, man, without seeing a drive-through. It's almost too convenient to buy, on your way from work, on your way back from work, knowing that there's nothing to eat. You've been outside your house, you've been living practically at work the whole time. And what I've also noticed with these kids, I would point more fingers at the parents they don't teach these kids how to cook. So even if you do buy vegetables, you don't know how to prepare it properly. So the best option is you just get oil, just plunk everything in, deep fry the shit out of everything, and just there you go. And like we were saying with these devices, what we've noticed as well is that the amount of junk food advertising that these kids are being bombarded with is next level. It's actually really, really difficult. And like McDonald's is a good example. They advertise just for young to young kids. So this kid just sees and then it's sort of like their mind just, a friend of mine actually once said that ice cream is like crack for babies, for children. And her story was she took her niece out for lunch, and the niece was, the child was just a normal toddler, 6-7-year-old kid, just a normal toddler. And then she bought her this ridiculous ice cream that they have with all this junk on top of it. And she could see how the child was just becoming a different being. And then we spoke about, like, really, it's it's a type of crack for babies. And it's the same thing.
Caffeine.
Yeah, we're back. Sorry about that, James. You got that last bit that I said, right?
Go repeat that. You talking about the ice cream is crack for babies?
Yeah, basically that. And I mean, like, it's a very careless way of putting it, but I see a lot of truth in that, unfortunately.
But you think about, ice cream, heavy in sugar. Nothing wrong with ice. Anything in moderation, as they would say.
Right.
Everything in moderation.
Exactly. But you look at ice cream. Core component sugar. Sugar is an addictive substance. Like nicotine, like other chemicals, sugar is an addictive substance. And so in America, at least, sugar is in everything. Brother, so I can speak this, it is a tough task finding something without sugar, without high fructose. Everything is made with high fructose corn syrup. But we don't want to talk about the politics and the economics of where does that come from? Corn. That is a major industry in the United States, an industry that the federal government subsidizes. And so there is an economic play in infiltrating our food supply with this high fructose corn syrup, which is made of a base of corn, which, by the way, is also genetically engineered, which also does something else to your body. And then there's big money for a lot of big companies behind all of that. And so, in essence, you're talking about billions of dollars being made on the suffering of people. So the FDA makes sure that you can get addicted to the food supply that does something that it naturally was not supposed to do. And then guess what? The pharmaceutical industry gives you the drugs so that they can manage you through that process, so that they can keep you living, making billions of dollars for them. So both the FDA,
Food and Drug
and the pharmaceutical industry are making billions of dollars on the suffering of people.
Right. And I just want to take a moment to say that Tommy is about the same size as he was when we were in school.
I got a couple more pounds. Okay?
That's the reason he's able to dress so fly. The rest of us has gained, a significant amount of weight. But yeah, my brother Tommy's about the same size he was when he was in school.
Nice one. In South Africa, if you want to have a good laugh about like how the diet has changed, not just our kids but our adults, just look at our parliament. Just look at all our parliamentarians. They're a bunch of what they call them seals, elephants. All of them are overweight.
Oh my goodness.
The vast majority of them are overweight, black and white. And it's actually quite disgusting. There's a few memes that goes around of some of the ANC members trying to play soccer. It's bad. It's really bad. I don't know. I don't see what type of PR this is. He's having these politicians in shorts running around and clearly hyperventilate, and these guys, in South Africa, politicians, and I blame Nelson Mandela for this, is that they sort of put on a pedestal where you can't touch them. I mean, that shit is changing, now. So now if you're sitting on there, especially the women, because they'll be wearing very expensive shit, like, and their handbags and etc. But all this obese, like, they don't look after themselves, man, and they don't even care. And some of them are always drunk on one. It's a disaster. If you want to have a good giggle, that's South Africa's expense.
That's pretty scary. That is pretty scary. There is a there's a comedian. Sorry, probably knows this. God rest his soul, Robin Harris, and he said, he was talking about his wife. He was a comedian, so you have to kind of take this tongue in cheek. He was talking about his wife, and he always made jokes about his wife. And he said, you know what? My wife's so ugly, people tell him close the blinds. So all that being said is that it is bad when you get to a point that the norm looks this bad and sloppy in terms of their overall health. And one of the old things we used to say is that, when white America catches a cold, Black America gets the flu or pneumonia. And so, when mainstream America are having health problems to this degree, that we are in catastrophic shape.
That's right.
Because again, we don't afford economically are not able to afford the healthier foods, going to the high-end grocery stores where they have fresh fruits and vegetables. So I can speak to this. I mean, in most of our communities, predominantly Black communities, you can't even find fresh fruits and vegetables in a lot of cases.
If you can find a supermarket, you have the food desert.
There you go. Food desert. That's another thing. If you can find a decent grocery store, you can hardly find healthy food, fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. And again, that contributes to the overall lack of health and poverty within our countries, because they say that you're really just one healthcare catastrophe from being absolutely broke and or in deep debt. And that's the sum total of our community, because the large majority of folks within our community are overweight or obese. I mean, we've reached a point where the women weigh more than the men. And that's a fact. That's sad. Because if the women look that way, what are the children going to look like?
Because the children are going to eat what the mother eats.
Problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was gonna say something that I've noticed. I paid attention, or let me actually put this on the table as well. In South Africa, in the townships, we have what they call spaza shops. So these are small shops that sell basic, bread, milk, vegetables, that type of thing. Most of them are run by East Africans and Asians. Now that has another spin to it, and I won't go there, but the quality of the food that these guys are selling is deeply problematic. And when I say that, so what they'll do, even something like baby formula, spices, just general spices for food. We are running out of time there. I actually didn't realize it was 2 minutes. That clock is not.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I was just gonna say the same thing. Because I was gonna explain, like, these shops are feeding our population, which is the worst type of food, and cancer, diabetes are one of the biggest diseases. And the various forms of cancer is across South Africa. Most Africans don't have access to medical aid, meaning that when you contract these things, it's pretty much game over, and you have prolong the suffering, which is a terrible thing. But my brother, it's a pity. It's a pity we ran out of time. There were so many other things we could cover, but it was really great having you. And thanks for the patience.
Tell everybody where they can find you on YouTube, Black Men Speak.
Oh yes, man. Man.
Black Men Speak is on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Central Time. Now, I'm not exactly sure what time that would be where you are.
Yeah, you guys are 9 hours. We're 9 hours ahead of you.
So it's 8. Is it 8 or 9?
8 p.m. Central.
No, I mean 8 or 9 hours, Wesley.
We're 8 hours ahead of you.
Okay.
So it would be earlier in the day. So that would be around noon. your time then. Is that what I'm understanding?
Okay.
Okay, well, that's good. So that would be noon your time, and then that would be 8 p.m. Central U.S. time.
Thanks for that, my brother. I subscribed to the channel and I've watched some of your episodes. Big up to that, man. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, we're good.
Yeah, man, and myself, you can catch me on the Art Lexcia on YouTube, and Wesley Pepper on all the social media channels. So that's Wesley, yeah, Pepper, Instagram, Facebook, we're all over. And my brothers are all the way from there at the bottom of the screen, your side.
You can catch me right here at African Genius. That's about it.
Yeah,
hey, man, I've enjoyed it. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Thanks for that, gents. Have a still early morning, early afternoon by your side. It's 10 o'clock my side, so I'm about to switch off for the evening. It was much fun, gentlemen. ASAR, I'll be in touch with you tomorrow, my brother, with all the production of these episodes and stuff. One love, my king. Big up.
All right. Love y'all, brother.